happy as he'll ever be in this fanfic. But that's the problem with reaching the top. There's nowhere left to go but down. It starts with Nekiro humoring the idea that Muse and humans can reunite, with Ash as an ambassador. For a moment, you think that you're nowhere near the top yet. Ash is gonna keep making his way onto greater things. Maybe fall in love with Misty, or Billy, or Mayo, save the world from the prophesied Dark Mew, etc. But then Nekiro withdraws from Ash, proving to be just as stubborn in his human skepticism. And then it's just one thing after another. Ash sees himself on television and finds his human form weird because he's a Mew now. Ash begins to have self-doubts about his champion badge, since he might have won it out of pity. During training to help Mayo become stronger, Ash has flashbacks to the time Team Rocket's Raticate bit him down to the bone. Nekiro reminds Ash of the Dark Mew prophecy, which, unlikely though it is, seems to pertain to him. Ash has a dream about turning evil and destroying his friends. As these unpleasant experiences accumulate, Ash continues to have flashbacks to the days of his youth. At this point, I think this is Dragoness giving us one last plunge into character relations before ripping them to shreds in the sequel. This is also the next significant point where I decided to cut material. I removed a flashback Ash had when Gary, Mayo, and Ash went Magikarp fishing and Ash nearly drowned in the water. Why? One, because there have already been several flashbacks about young Gary and Mayo, and this one seemed to have very little character development that we hadn't already seen. Two, the incident is inconsequential to the rest of the story. And three, it occurs directly after a flashback about Ash's mom, and Ash Ketchum already had the least amount of character development. She finally got a special segment in the story, and I didn't want it diluted amongst other flashbacks. As always, you can read the uncut version by clicking the link. So now we get to the event that finally turns everything upside down. Ash offers to accompany Mayo when she looks for a strong team Pokemon, and it sets up like just another journey in the woods. But then I insert a Nazgul screech sound effect, and a flock of Spearow attack the party. This is the alternate reality version of their revenge from the time Ash and Pikachu shocked them all in submission in the first episode. The party gets away, but not before Ash receives a serious beating to the boundary of death. I'll tell you what, he cheats death more often than Emiyashiro. So, here comes the evil fog, or as we come to know it, the disease. While Ash lies in a comatose state, he has dreams and visions of the past, the future, and events of a parallel universe. He relives Mewtwo's genetic birth and betrayal. Then he experiences his evil self of the future, leading armies of mind slaves. Then his human self comes to say goodbye to him. Dreams blend with reality, but all are torturous and painful. Isolated and confused, Ash begins to break down mentally. This is another point where I debate myself about the quality of Dragoness's writing choices. I think her plan was to load Ash with this trauma and self-doubt, then have this disease fog jumpstart his path to evil. I'm sure she believed that she had taken it slowly enough that the transition was smooth and convincing. However, it didn't work for me. From the beginning, she has portrayed Ash to be incredibly resilient to evil, just as the hobbits with Sauron's ring. I've listed almost all of Ash's tribulations in this summary, so as a reader, I've become convinced that nothing can break his spirit. He's come through them all, still himself. So why is a magical fog suddenly the exception to the rule? Well, because Dragoness had to hold herself accountable for making a prophecy that Ash will turn evil. Okay, Kenta, some of you may be saying, what would you have done differently? Well, I would have started Ash's path to evil sooner, subtly at first. For example, when he fled to the wild and began killing Pokemon for food to survive, he'd feel remorseful at first. But steadily, the remorse would be replaced by a desire for tastier meat. Maybe after freeing his Pokemon from Giovanni, Ash would have injected him with mind control nanomachines. On the surface, he would justify it by claiming Giovanni couldn't do any more bad things. But in his mind, it would be revenge for when Giovanni did it to him. And as for Gary, maybe after taking so much of his crap, Ash could mind shock Gary by accident and feel bad about it at first. But then later, after more of Gary's taunting, he'd feel like maybe Gary deserved it, or worse. You see what I mean? Little else would change apart from these incidents. Ash would still care about his family and friends, be a naive idiot around girls, try to do the right thing overall, but these little incidents would be legitimate foundations for real evil later on. People don't become evil through magical forces. They turn evil because mindsets and choices they make early on. But that's just how I do it, and I'm not Dragoness. She wanted to maintain a sympathetic character, even if it meant getting a completely different person on the other side of the evil fog. One last thing then, and I'll move forward. This was another time I made a cut from the story. I took away most of the Mewtwo flashback, because most of it was a play-by-play rehash of the first Pokemon movie. The fog dreams of dead human Ash and evil future Ash were balanced in length, but the Mewtwo sequence was much longer. Was it a necessary aspect of this story? Sort of. It foreshadows the tyrannical behavior Ash exhibits in the next story, and it paints the metaphorical death of human Ash when Mewtwo Ash kills him. This was probably my least justifiable cut, but I wanted to maintain focus on Dragoness Bahamut's story making my way, and not Pokemon the first movie. We're not here to revisit the battle between Brute the Venusaur and Shellshocker the Blastoise and their clones. We're here to witness the story of a child suffering. That's the kind of people we are. Alright, so making my way winds down with Ash coming out of his coma sleep, deprived of food, but stronger than ever before. Nekiro and Mewtwo confront him, somewhat fearfully, about the dreams he's been having. Ash reacts in anger and violence, feeling that it's not their business to pry, then realizes that he really is turning into the Dark Mew of the prophecy. To stop himself from ruining the world, he commits suicide with his own psychic blast. That's how the story ends in this universe. For the record, I'm not a believer in multiverse theory. I won't get into why, just figured I'd mention it since it's used here. So, we know of at least two universes here, the one in the original television show timeline, and the one in Dragoness' story so far. Now we get into a third alternate reality, in which Ash doesn't kill himself after all. Instead, we get a story that's significantly more tragic, where it turns out his suicide really would have been the best choice after all. Early on, I was considering leaving it at that since it was technically the ending, but stopping at such an abrupt ending would be a real dick move, wouldn't it? So I swapped the color scheme of the original picture, added the unfittingly pleasant music that Dragoness chose, and let the bodies hit the floor. Ash attacks Mewtwo and Nekiro like before, but is not yet at his full conviction for purging the world, so he lets them live. He heads back for Pallet Town, but is stopped by Ho-Oh, the hitherto unmentioned guardian of the area. She reveals that she has been protectively watching him and other Pallet denizens since before his birth, seeking out the Dark Mew and the Pure One who will defeat him. Anyone else might at this point have at least considered such words, and the legendary creature they came from. Ash, however, coldly sees her as nothing but an obstacle blocking the way. Ho-Oh recognizes him as the Dark Mew, and attempts to keep him out, without success. They get into a mortal struggle, and Ash is forced to kill her. Now this is more like it. This Ash starts out as a mostly unfeeling, but not yet murderous person. Ho-Oh was an appropriate first step in the carnage to come for two reasons. One, she gave an infuriating line about how she had been Ash's protector all along, when he clearly was not protected. Two, she was the cause of her own death. All Ash wanted to do at this point was go back to his house, and she would not get out of his way until he was forced to blast her aside. Then she counterattacked, and things continued to escalate until one of the two died. I'm not defending Ash, by the way. He was the bigger aggressor here. But this is how you go from 0 to 60 down the road to hell. So Ash ends up zipping straight over Pallet Town and into the ruins of Pokemopolis City. He then does what the villain of X-Men Apocalypse would do 15 years after the writing of this fanfic. He resurrects the city and gathers slaves to put under mind control. Gary is the first and only person to challenge Ash's tyranny, and Ash kills both him and his Arcanine in front of a terrified crowd. Then they relinquish their minds and Pokemon to him, and only Mayo and Pikachu escape. A little later, Misty angrily demands to know what's gotten into Ash. He gives her a jolt of pain, but it only reinforces her belief that the Mew floating before her isn't the Ash she knows. Ash takes to this idea, proclaiming himself henceforth to be Ashura, the name he once hated. Misty ends up becoming Ashura's most loyal servant, and she and a couple other people are permitted to keep control of their minds. Then comes the war. Mewtwo arrives, demanding that Ashura surrender before he uses force. Ashura simply dares Mewtwo to kill him, but Mewtwo isn't able to do so. However, the remaining legendary birds arrive, and they are intent on avenging their fallen comrade, Ho-Oh. Ashura manages to kill all of them, even when Nekiro steps in to fight on their behalf. Incidentally, Nekiro is portrayed in a depressed state for the entirety of this story. After all, he'd sworn before the Council of Mews that he would look after Ash. Not only did he fail in his duty, but his ward turned out to be the evil entity everyone had feared. His last battle against Ashura is the only time he shows aggression rather than remorse. and I was pleasantly surprised at how tough he ended up being. He still loses, but it was good to know that he wasn't just all talk. Once he realizes that Ashura is unstoppable, he resigns himself to his failure and lays down to die by the corpse of Lugia. Boy, that part hit me hard. Like I said, I don't cry over fictional stories, but that's about as close as I ever got. Once this key battle is over, Ashura goes on the offensive, taking over city after city like a mind control plague. Mayo makes one last appearance, and though she doesn't die in her meeting with Ashura, he had intentions to kill her for resisting. Eventually, he kills Mewtwo and subdues the whole world, so Mayo is presumed to have fallen to mind control, or died as originally planned. Here's something to consider. I had to go through this story 4 times to record my voice, edit out the mistakes, add the music, and add the sound effects. Every time I was freshly introduced to the characters through Ash, I knew their fates. Hello, Gary, my pretty. Ash is gonna kill you, and your little dog, too. Hi, Mrs. Ketchum. You're gonna suffer a long, slow death of heartbreak. Hiya, Misty. Your death will be shorter, but the suffering will be more intense. Nikiro, God, it sucks to be you. Mayo, I still don't know what happened to you, but Ash killed your first Pokemon right in front of you. Brock, Billy, all things considered, you two got off really easy. Mewtwo, I didn't know you that well, but at least you went down in a blaze of glory, right? Giovanni, not sure what happened to you, but it was probably too gruesome for words. Pikachu, you're going to die alone and afraid on a desolate island. Richie, you'll get to witness your Pikachu die, and then follow him after 10 years. It's pretty bad when you know what's coming. I don't know what God's intervention policy is, but I can only imagine how he felt about the Holocaust.